So let's go ahead and see what we got on the docket today. Did I update this? I did not update this. So we will just make up things as we go along. What we're going to start with actually is recapping the 12 labors. But what we will move to after that is the story of Theseus, right? Who you guys probably know from Theseus and the Minotaur. And then from there, we will talk a little bit about Achilles. But first, some announcements. All right, you guys know the basic announcements, right? Go ahead and put it in speaker view. You can see me, you can see what's on the board, you can see everything. You're gonna be in great shape. If you have a question, go ahead and bother your TAs. They love it. I know they're over there like sending emails and being all productive. And if you bother them with questions, it makes their day. I can promise you this. All right, in terms of midterms coming back to you, they will be back to you by the end of the weekend, all right? And one of the things I'll do is after we get all those grades in, I'll make sure I take a look at the grades, see what the distribution of grades is, and we can adjust anything accordingly, just in case everybody like bombed the midterm. I'm sure that's not the case. I'm sure you guys all did fabulously on it, but I'll make sure to take a look at the distribution of grades just in case to make sure they look like we want them to look like. Okay, another thing that's not on the announcements, but I was thinking of as I was putting together today's lecture. So I think we're in week 9 now. We're going into week 10. I don't know about you guys, like I think there's like a little bit of a level of like burnout going on. Not so much in this class, but just like overall. What would you guys think about doing next week like asynchronously? So here's like the proposition. Okay, so like I'll put the lectures up online, right? You'll watch them just like this. You'll take notes. The only difference is you get to do it whenever you want to, and just everybody will get attendance. All right, so you can kind of take 1 week where at least from 11 to 12 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you guys can, I don't know, go watch a lecture at the coffee shop, or sleep in, or play video games, or do whatever you want. All right. So here is we're gonna like actually pull the class here. Because if everybody is like, this is the greatest part of my Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I am certainly happy to be here. I don't want to take that away from you. But if people are like, I just need a break, a little bit of a break, maybe this would be one way to give it to you. So here's the poll itself. Go ahead and answer accordingly. And after about a minute, we will take whatever we got and move on with it. All right, 90% of the votes are in, and it's about 70-30 to yes, take a little bit of a break from live classes. So here's what's gonna happen. You can book it in your schedules now. I'm gonna go ahead and post the lectures on D2L for next week. You're gonna find it in the same place that you find everything else. You can watch those whenever you'd like. They're totally fair game on the exam, but you don't have like a particular time that you have to do them. So if you want to wake up and watch them at 7 a.m. over a cup of coffee, great. If you want to watch them over an ice cold beer at, 11 p.m., also great. If you don't want to watch them, well, you should watch them. I put a lot of effort into them, so watch them. But that'll be the plan for next week. TAs, you guys do have to teach this Friday, but you're off the hook for next Friday. So hopefully it'll be just a little bit of a way to recharge and put in a good final push between now and Thanksgiving. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so recapping Heroes and Heracles. Remember, one of the things that we talked about with heroes was a little bit about the conception of heroes in Greek antiquity and comparing that to contemporary modernity. And one of the differences we kind of saw was that when we look at modern heroes, almost always, right, we're like looking at people who are really good people, right? Maybe they have a bad backstory or something like that, but they're like good people trying to help the world. When we look at heroes in Greek antiquity, very frequently they're heroes because in some way they're blessed by the gods, right? And as a result, they perform these kind of extraordinary deeds, but not necessarily exemplary deeds, if that makes sense, okay? So that they are, they're extra strong or fast or smart or whatever, but they sometimes do terrible stuff, right? And we saw that with our example of Diomedes the boxer, who lost his first ever boxing bout because he accidentally killed his opponent. And when he was told that he lost, he went home, he collapsed the school building on top of 60 children. He then ran away to hide in a little chest in the Temple of Athena, and poof, he was gone. And through that story, one of the things that we looked at was the different traits associated with heroes in Greek antiquity. And so for the first one, we see that heroes die. And we were talking about Heracles last time. We'll kind of finish that story off this time. And we'll see that he does actually die, and then it's kind of after death that he's made immortal. So that's the first one, heroes die. Secondly, heroes perform extraordinary, but not necessarily exemplary deeds. Heroes, when they do die, it's often in weird and strange and violent or mysterious or somewhat weird way, okay? Then after death, they are worshipped at their gravesite, right? So that's one of the big differences. Gods get worshipped in temples. Heroes get worshipped at gravesites. And then after that, they are commemorated in song and in ritual. Okay, so heroes die, extraordinary but not exemplary deeds. They die in kind of weird ways. They are worshipped at the gravesite, and they are remembered in song and ritual. Very good. All right, and then we were talking about Heracles, right? We talked about the birth of Heracles, and him wrestling snakes as a tiny little baby boy, and then him killing his own family in this kind of frenzy that was put on him by Hera. And in order to work off that kind of bad deed, he was told that he had to complete a series of labors for King Eurystheus, the king of Tiryns. And so Eurystheus originally assigns him 10 labors, right? And we see that even with the first one, when he kills the Nemean lion and then wears the lion skin back, King Eurystheus gets so scared, right? He jumps in a jar and he says, don't show me these things anymore. So the first one, the Nemean lion, from there, he goes on to fight the Lernaean Hydra, right? This kind of water serpent type thing with many different heads, and each time you cut off a head, 2 more grow back, and he's able to get help from Aeolus, who ends up cauterizing the wounds when Heracles cuts off the head in order for them not to grow back. And we'll see that although this was kind of clever at the time, this actually ends up causing some problems because Eurystheus is going to be like, that didn't count. Which sucks, right? It should totally count, but for whatever reason, King Eurystheus says no. All right, and then we see some endurance and speed-based labors, right? So we see Heracles capturing the Kyrian hind, right? The stag of Artemis, and eventually bringing it back to Eurystheus. And then also the Erymanthian boar, right? One of these large, super fast, super strong pigs, basically, that he uses or that he captures by kind of leading him into the snow and then biting at his feet and taking him back to King Eurystheus. And you can see a good image over here, right, of I don't know how ancient Greeks pictured Heracles bringing back these animals to King Eurystheus as he hides in a little jar. All right, and then the shittiest of all the labors, right, the Aegean stables, where we see he has to shovel the crap of these divine horses, right, that produce poisonous crap, and a lot of it. And even Heracles, with all his strength and speed and power, can't do this in the normal sort of way. So Athena helps him by by kind of encouraging him to think outside the box and divert the local river to clean the stables for him. Then we've got the Stemphalian birds, right? These kind of man-eating birds that are kind of reside inside of Lake Stemphalia. And once again, we see Athena's help by giving him this rattle, basically. That when he shakes the rattle, the sound gets the birds to arise from the lake, and then Heracles is able to shoot them down with arrows. From there, we see a journey to the island of Crete. And one of the things you'll see actually later today, right? The island of Crete, kind of in all of Greek antiquity, very, very strongly associated with the animal, the bull. And in this case, we see the Cretan bull. And Heracles goes there. The bull is just wrecking crops and houses and walls and orchards and everything. And Heracles is able to sneak up behind the bull, make it pass out, and then ship the whole thing back to King Eurystheus. Now, Eurystheus is so scared of this thing again that he just lets it free. And we'll see that our next hero, Theseus, actually ends up having to chase down that same bull later on, even though it's under a different name. Next up, we've got the mares of Diomedes, right? These human flesh-eating horses that also happen to breathe fire. And here, once again, Heracles is using at least a little bit of intelligence, and what he does is he leads these horses out onto a peninsula, and then he digs a ditch, right? So turning that peninsula into an island. And then on that island, the horses can't get away from him. He goes back and he kills Diomedes, which, I don't know, I gotta read more into the story. I don't know what Diomedes did to deserve that, but he kills Diomedes and he feeds him to his own horses, which is just rude, to be honest. But he does that, and then the horses calm down, and then he binds their mouths shut and takes them back to good old King Eurystheus. Then we've got the Amazonian belt of Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons. And this one starts where Heracles goes to visit Hippolyta, and he's like, oh, you're like a hot warrior babe. And she's like, well, you're a buff warrior dude. And they kind of like each other. And then Hera gets involved again and starts sowing these seeds of distrust. And it ends up in a bloody death, with Heracles killing Hippolyta and taking the belt back to Eurystheus so that he can give it to his daughter. And then the last one we talked about on Monday was labor number 10, the cattle of Garion. And this one takes a couple steps here, right? So first he's got to kill this guard dog Orthrus, who is kind of like a Cerberus type character. And then he's got to kill the owner of that dog, this herdsman, Ertion, who you can see, Erition down here, laying down there. And then we've got Garion himself, which is this giant dude who's made of 3 different heads and 3 different bodies, and is super strong and buff, obviously. And Heracles ends up taking him down, at least in the textual versions, using arrows. Here it looks like he's gonna stab him in the eye or something along those lines. So, anyway. Now, the problem is, right, when he ends up completing this 10th labor, he goes back to Eurystheus and he's like, all right, I assume I'm free now. And Eurystheus is kind of gotten into the idea that he just has this really strong guy doing all these things for him. And he's just coming up with excuses. And he's like, actually, no. 2 of those labors didn't count. And Heracles is all like, what are you talking about? I just did 10 incredible labors. And Eurystheus is like, well, you had a helper with the Lernaean Hydra. And, the Aegean stables, you didn't actually clean them. It was the river that cleaned them. And so he's gonna have to do 2 more labors now. And this one is a particularly difficult one, involving getting the apples of the Hesperides. And the Hesperides, as you see, these women up here, who are the daughters of Atlas the Titan. Now, one of the problems here is that he doesn't even know where to begin looking for these. And so he's got to go through a series of labors just to get to the point where he can actually make it to the Hesperides. And once he does, and once he's able to get the apples, he goes back and he's talking to Atlas, right? And so the way that this works, right, he's talking to Atlas, and Atlas says basically he's going to get the apples for him. But Heracles has got to hold the world, right? Remember, Atlas is the dude with the world on his shoulders like that, and Heracles has got to hold the world while Atlas goes and gets the apples. Now, Atlas is thinking, like, after he gets out of holding the world, he's like, I'm free. I don't have to do this anymore. And he goes back to Heracles, and he's like, Heracles, I've changed my mind. I will just not take the world back, and how about you just keep doing that forever? And Heracles, using a not particularly good trick, but one that somehow works, is like, all right, that's fine. I'll hold the world forever for you. But can you just take it back for a second while I, like, readjust and get a little bit more comfortable? And that's, like, the oldest trick in the book. But Atlas is a dumb titan, and he's like, okay, I'll hold the world for you. And then once he, like, takes it for a second, Heracles just takes the golden apple, or takes the apples of the Hesperides and walks away and takes them back to good old King Eurystheus. And then finally, we've got Cerberus, right? The multi-headed dog, right? We think of him usually as a three-headed dog. In Greek antiquity, in the different sources, he shows up as everything from like a two-headed dog, like you see right here, to a 50-headed dog, like you see in it's either Theogony or the Works and Days. It's one of Hesiod's works. But many heads, very violent, the guardian of the gates of the underworld, making sure that nobody gets back out. So Heracles has to go down there and get Cerberus himself and bring it back to King Eurystheus. Now, once he's down in the underworld, he does a couple things. So first of all, he rescues Theseus, and we're going to see a little bit of that later today. We'll see that after Theseus does all his labors and like kills the Minotaur and stuff, he goes off on this like buddy adventure with this guy Periphetes, and they are like, hey, you know what we should do is let's go steal ourselves some women. And Theseus is like, Theseus and Periphetes are down in the underworld because one of the women they want to steal is Persephone herself. And you can imagine that that doesn't work out very well. But luckily Heracles goes down there and frees Theseus. And Hades ends up green, and he says, like, look, Heracles, all right, you can take Cerberus if you can subdue him without weapons. And Heracles, big buff dude, able to take down Cerberus, takes him back to King Eurystheus. And at this point, when Heracles shows up with Cerberus himself, Eurystheus just says, that's enough. You're done, you're free, you can get out of here, your labors are complete. And so that's why we talk about the 12 labors of Heracles. Even though he was originally given 10, he completes 12, Cerberus being the last one, and then he's freed from his labors. All right, one of the things that I was going to talk about, but didn't make it into the slideshow, I guess, I don't know who's putting these things together, was like Heracles in tragedy and in drama, right? So like we see these in different kind of stories from Greek antiquity, the labors of Heracles. But we also have him showing up as a character in plays. And one of the things that we talked about last time was that when we're looking at plays, they tend to emphasize different attributes than kind of more adventurous stories, right? So if you picture these labors as adventures, the drama in the plays involving Heracles focus on different aspects of his like kind of relationship with his family. So there are several plays about him kind of going crazy and killing his family. There's another play where he shows up at his friend's house, and his friend's wife has just died, but he doesn't know this, and he's kind of acting like a drunken fool. And then like he makes up for it by wrestling death. Like Thanatos, he wrestles death, and he like tries to get this lady back to the actual world. But very much kind of emphasizing different familial engagements as opposed to different familial engagements as opposed to his main labors. And then finally, to talk about the end of Heracles, one of the things that we see is that he basically gets tricked into putting on this kind of garment that has been soaked in the blood of a centaur. That's basically like poison blood. And he ends up dying that way. But after his death, the gods are all like, this guy, like, you know, kind of this hero was so amazing that he really does deserve to live on in infamy, or live on in infamy. He deserves to live on. And so there's a couple different versions of the story. In some, he goes to the island of the Blessed. In others, it's the White Island. But either way, Heracles ends up kind of immortal in one of these kind of very heaven-like parts of the underworld. So, you know, most people are wandering around. Hopefully you guys got that one on the exam. Most people are wandering around. Heracles gets the kind of good afterlife. So let's move on to the hero Theseus. Now, when we think of Theseus, right, we just finished talking about Heracles, and there are quite a few parallels here, right? So one of the major parallels is he's doing the same things, right? He's slaying beasts, he's defeating evildoers, he's winning over princesses and things like that. He has his own series of labors, even though it's only 6 of them instead of 12 of them. So in many ways, right, we know him from the Minotaur, but he actually, when you add up all these different things, ends up acting kind of a lot like Heracles. On the other hand, Heracles is this like pan-Greek hero, right? Like everybody loves Heracles. And that's interesting in the sense that we have to remember that ancient Greek society was based on multiple different city-states, right? So even though like people in Athens, in Sparta, in Corinth, in Thebes, even though they all speak Greek, and even though they all kind of worship the same gods, politically they're all totally independent, right? And they're frequently fighting with each other. So Heracles becomes this kind of pan-Hellenic hero, whereas Theseus becomes a particularly Athenian hero. And we'll see that many of his labors involve his kind of journey to Athens, and even the Minotaur is kind of done on Athens' behalf. And so he becomes a hero specifically associated with the Athenian city-state. All right, now, the birth of Theseus, right? So he's the son of King Aegeus of Athens. And King Aegeus basically makes a trip down to, I think it's in the Argolid, the town of Troezen. And there he sleeps with the daughter of the king, this woman Hydra here, right? And what he does is he's not like a particularly good dad. So he's like, all right, well, I got you pregnant. I'm going to go ahead and leave. You can kind of see it down here. Let me get my big head out of the way. Yeah, you can see it down here. I'm going to leave some sandals and a sword underneath a rock, right? You can see this giant rock here. And go ahead and just raise our kid for like a while. And when he's strong enough to lift that rock, then you can like send him back to me. So again, not really very present parenting, but gives the kid a challenge. Once he can complete that, he can go back to Athens. And so you can see Troezen is where this all begins, down here in the Argolid. And then you can see his journey is going to be through the Argolid, across the Isthmus of Corinth right here, and then into Attica, that's the region of Athens right here, and eventually ending in Athens. And then after he does that, then he goes on this journey down to Crete, right? That's where he deals with the Minotaur, stops on the island of Naxos, that's where he discards his wife Ariadne, and then back to Athens, and we'll see that that kind of ends in a dark way as well. Okay, so he grows up, right? His mom, Hydra, raises him. He grows up. He is headed back to Athens after he lifts the stone and takes the sword and the sandals. And along the way, he has 6 different encounters with kind of these guardians of the underworld, right? So some of our animals, some of them are these kind of like evildoer bandit minor divinity type things. And he's going to deal with all of them along the way. And these deeds end up being depicted on the Temple of Hephaestus in Athens and on the Athenian treasury at the site of Delphi. And so two major temples associated with Athens, both depicting the kind of heroic deeds of Theseus. And so if you remember back to the Temple of Hephaestus in Athens, right, this is the one that just is sitting right over the Agora, the marketplace. And it's actually the other side of this temple that has the best depicted metopes of the labors of Theseus. Okay, so the way this works, right, is he's on this journey going by foot, and along the way there are these different entrances to the underworld. And guarding each of those entrances is some sort of kind of like bandit type thing. And this gets back to the idea of travel in the ancient world being particularly kind of dangerous and difficult. And Theseus is a guy who's out there making this safer for everyone. Now, the first guy that he has to deal with is this guy Periphetes, which very literally means like the club bearer, all right? And this takes place next to the site of Epidaurus. Hopefully that name sounds familiar to you, right? Like the sanctuary of Asclepius, the god of healing, as well as one of these theaters where plays would have been performed, these perfect acoustics. And Theseus is able to defeat Periphetes, the club bearer, and then he starts beating him with his own club. And so usually when you see Theseus, he doesn't have quite the same looking type of club as Heracles, but he's got a short, stout little staff here, and he's beating old bald Periphetes there with his own club. Next up, so the second of the six labors, he is defeating Sinis. Also with like the kind of epithet, Sinis' epithet is Pitiocampes, which means he who bends the trees. And what this guy Sinis does, right, is he attacks travelers, he attacks passersby, and he ties them up to two bent over trees, right? So he bends over a tree, bends over another tree, ties those like treetops to people's arms, or like arms and legs or something like that. And then, right, like lets the trees like spring back upwards. And in the process, you can imagine what happens to the person. They get ripped completely in half. Pretty gruesome stuff. Now Theseus, one of the things that he does, as you'll see here, right? Remember, with Periphetes, he's beating him with his own club. With Sinis, he also defeats him using his own form of, his own form of attack or whatever it is. He ties Sinis to the two trees, lets him spring back up. He gets ripped in half. And then apparently he goes and sleeps with the guy's daughter, which is super messed up. And obviously this guy's not a good dude, but still that's pretty cold to rip somebody in half and then go get busy with his daughter. So, dang. Anyway, let's move on. Next up, we've got Theseus and the Cramian Sow, all right? The Cramian Sow, this enormous pig, right? Almost kind of like the parallel of the Erymanthian boar. This sow is bred by this kind of old crone or old witch, this woman Phaia. And this is just north of the Isthmus, the one that connects kind of Attica, where Athens is, to the Argolid. And this pig has been the offspring of two of these monsters that go all the way back to Hesiod's Theogony. So Theseus takes care of the pig, and he is then on to labor number 4. Now this is one of the great stops along the way. So there's this guy, Skyron here. He's this old dude, right? And he's just sitting by the side of the road, and when people come by, he asks he asks them to wash his feet, basically. He's like, I'm an old guy. Please help me. Wash my feet. And then when they bend over to do that, he kicks them off a cliff. And as the story goes, once he gets kicked off of the cliff into the water, there's like a giant like sea monster or a turtle or something like that like ends up eating him. And this is like one of the all-time great like pieces of art from Greek antiquity, where you have Theseus, young Theseus, dealing with Sciron or Skyron here, throwing him off the cliff, and then this turtle is about to swim up and eat the guy. But it looks like such a friendly turtle. Yeah. Yeah, also I got a message in the chat here. It is a weird story about a guy with a foot fetish. Yeah, that's correct. All right, next up, we've got Theseus and Kyrian, or Cercion, the king of Eleusis, and hopefully that sounds familiar, right? You know we're getting close to Athens when we're at Eleusis here. And he's just kind of a mean guy who challenges passersby to wrestling matches. And he's kind of saying like, oh, if you beat me, I'll give you my daughter in marriage. But nobody beats him, and he wins, and then he kills people. So, of course, Theseus, right, using his own method, wrestles him, defeats him in wrestling, and kills him instead. And then finally, we have one of the most memorable ones here. Let's see if we can bring that up a little bit. Hang on 1 second, so you guys can actually read this. There we go. All right, finally we've got Theseus and Procrustes, all right? Also known as the Stretcher. And so Procrustes, right, he sits by the side of the road, and he offers passersby a place to sleep. How nice of him. But what happens is whenever they stop by, he's got 2 different beds. And if it's like a tall guy, he puts the traveler on the short bed. And if it's like a short guy, he puts the traveler on the long bed. And then he like makes them fit the bed, right? So if it's the short guy on the long bed, he like stretches them out to fit the long bed. And if it's like a long guy on the short bed, he like ends up like cutting off his like feet or his like head to make him fit the bed. And so Theseus again, right, puts Procrustes on the bed and cuts off his legs and cuts off his head. And then finally, right, with the 6th of these kind of underworld bandits taken care of, he's finally able to make his way to Athens. Okay, so when he gets to Athens, he doesn't reveal his identity immediately. And Medea, the kind of current wife of King Aegeus, ends up recognizing him nonetheless. And she's not happy, and you'll see like later on, it might be next week when we get to Medea, that like she like doesn't react well to things. I mean, she has like a lot of reasons for legitimately being upset, but she has very strong reactions when things don't go her way. And so she decides, hey, I've got a great idea. I will send Theseus to try to capture this bull that's been running wild for a long time. It's the same bull that Heracles brought back to King Eurystheus. Now it's called the Marathonian bull because it's like made its way up into into Attica in the region of Marathon. And so Theseus has to go capture the Marathonian bull, and that's what you're looking at here. And when he comes back, Medea tries to poison him. She was like, okay, that didn't work. I'll try to poison the guy. But King Aegeus, at the very, very last second, recognizes the sandals and the sword that he had put under the big rock all those years ago, right? And so at the last minute, he like knocks the poison out of Medea's hand. Or I guess if Theseus was holding it at that time, he knocks it out of Theseus's hand, and he's reunited with his son. Very sweet story. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and build on the story of the Minotaur. Why is that cut off? What's going on there? There we go. Okay, so this is the most popular story, of course, about Theseus, right? Theseus and the Minotaur. And this all happens after he's completed his labors on his way to Athens. So the Minotaur, of course, comes from the island of Crete, and we'll see Theseus making his way there. But in order to kind of give you some backstory about the Minotaur itself, we actually have to go way back in time, way before the days of Theseus. Now, if you remember way back in time, way to the beginning of this class, you'll remember the story of Europa and the bull, right? And so Europa was this Phoenician princess from North Africa. Zeus takes a shine to her, turns himself into a bull. She ends up hopping on top of the bull, and then they zoom off to the island of Crete. And Europa's kind of descendants end up being King Minos, the first king of the island of Crete. So King Minos is kind of contractually obligated to sacrifice his best bull every single year to Poseidon, the god of the sea, right? And every year, this is going fine until one year where like the best bull is just like so amazingly beautiful that King Minos just can't bring himself to do it. And so he sacrifices his second best bull to Poseidon. And you can kind of imagine how this plays out, right? That like Poseidon is obviously not fooled, and he's gonna take just horrific vengeance on King Minos. So Poseidon sits around and he says, okay, well, you like your bull so much, how about I make your wife like the bull, right? And like really like the bull in a pretty weird and messed up kind of way. And so King Minos' wife, a woman by the name of Pasiphae, ends up falling in love with this like beautiful bull, all right? So much so that she goes to her kind of court architect, I guess they just had an architect sitting around, and she says, hey, can you build me a bull costume? And so you can see from this fresco from Pompeii here, right? We've got Daedalus, the architect, having built this bull costume, his little tiny son Icarus down here. And Pasiphae ends up getting in the bull or in the cow costume, and you can kind of imagine what happens afterwards. It's really messed up kind of stuff. And 9 months later, you have a cute baby Minotaur. Look at how cute he is. Little baby Minotaur. Yeah. Very cute. Okay, so we've got this hideous Minotaur, half man, half bull, the offspring of Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, and this incredibly beautiful, blessed, almost divine bull from the flock of King Minos. Now, the Minotaur is so hideous, right? Or so cute. I guess probably hideous. That he needs to be kept down in the bowels of the palace, all right? And so he has the architect, Daedalus, the same guy who built the cow outfit, build him a labyrinth underneath the palace. And so you can see an ancient mosaic with a depiction of the labyrinth here, and you can see Theseus and the Minotaur in the center of that labyrinth, right? Now, what happens afterwards is that once Daedalus and his son Icarus end up building the labyrinth, King Minos is thinking like, well, they're the only ones with the secret knowledge for how to get into and out of the center of the labyrinth where the Minotaur actually is. So I will just imprison them and not let them ever meet anybody ever again, and then the secret will never get out. But Daedalus, the ever-inventive architect, decides that being sealed up in prison sucks, and so he and his son Icarus here, they build themselves some wings out of wax. And they start flapping their wings and flying away. But like young men often are, young Icarus gets a little he gets like a little over excited, right? And he starts flying, and he's like, I'm flying, Dad, I'm flying. And he flies all the way up high into the sky, but he flies too close to the sun, and the sun is hot, and it starts melting the wings, the wax wings. And then Icarus plunges deep into the sea with poor Daedalus, his father, looking on. Now, while this is all going on, back in Athens, they are under obligation to send 7 boys and 7 girls to King Minos each year. And there's a couple different reasons for this, either because there's like a loss in war, or because King Minos' son got killed in the city of Athens a while back. Couple different explanations. But every year they got to send 7 boys and 7 girls. Basically, they get put in the labyrinth with the Minotaur. Bad things happen. And Theseus, right, once he's returned to Athens, decides he's had enough of this and he's going to put a stop to it. So he goes down and he goes to the palace of King Minos, and there he meets Minos' daughter, Ariadne. And Ariadne falls in love with big, beefy, buff Theseus here, and she gives him this silver thread so that when he makes his way into the labyrinth, he can then find his way out effectively, right? He's not going to get lost in there. And in most depictions here, what we end up seeing is Theseus clubs the Minotaur to death, very frequently cutting off his head afterwards, and then he uses that silver thread to make his way out of the labyrinth. All right, now, one of the kind of cool things is that when we actually look at the island of Crete, we don't have like a labyrinth per se, but when you look at the Palace of Knossos, the kind of the major palace, the biggest and most elaborate palace on the island, that dates all the way back to the Bronze Age, you actually get something that kind of sort of feels like a labyrinth. So first of all, you get lots of bull imagery. You can kind of see a little bit of that up there. But also when you look at the plan of the palace itself and all this sort of stuff, you can kind of get a sense for its kind of labyrinthine design, right? So this is a plan of the palace. You can see why it kind of feels like a labyrinth. So again, this is like an actual palace of the Minoans named after King Minos, going back to the Bronze Age. And some people kind of say that the inspiration for the labyrinth is built on the complexity of this palace. Okay, now Theseus and Ariadne, they end up sailing away together to live long, beautiful life together, and they go to the island of Naxos, and Naxos, as you can see, is this very, very charming Cycladic island, and then Theseus just leaves her there. And we don't really know what happened, but he's just like, peace out, I gotta go home. And so he goes back to Athens to go see his dad. But along the way, he forgets to put up the white sails. Before he had left, his dad said, if you're alive on your way back, please put up the white sails so I will know from a distance that you're alive. And Theseus, even though he is still alive, has just forgotten the instructions of his dad. And so when he pulls up to the coast of Attica, his dad is like on a cliff watching the ship sail up. He's watching the black sails, and King Aegeus throws himself into the sea. And that's why we call it the Aegean Sea, because King Aegeus, the father of Theseus, has thrown himself into that. Now, one of the things that we see is Theseus in Tragedy ends up being like a little bit different. Like Heracles is kind of an up and down character in Tragedy. Theseus kind of seems like a good dude. So Theseus, like, for example, in Hippolytus, reconciles with his son, even though he kind of kills his son. But it's because he thought his son was sleeping with his wife. And so anyway, he reconciles on his deathbed. In the Suppliants, we see him working on behalf of the Argive women to retrieve these bodies of the dead for proper burial. Overall, compared to many of the other heroes in Greek mythology, so people like Achilles or something like that, Theseus is seen as a relatively good dude. So let's go ahead. We will finish today with attendance. Go ahead and put in green for today. And then what we'll do is we will pick up with Achilles on Friday. So TAs, if you guys want to focus on the Iliad, the character of Achilles, and then maybe working towards the revised draft of the research proposal, those are all great topics for Friday. But we'll wrap up with attendance here. Go ahead and see if there's any questions in the chat. Let's see. Old guy has a foot fetish. Yep, that's pretty weird. Did they mention it in Percy Jackson? I think so. Why were such stories so brutal? Yeah, so this actually gets back, like, why were the stories so brutal? One of the things is that, like, traveling in ancient Greece really was just very, very dangerous. And so there's quite a few myths in terms of gods protecting travelers or myths highlighting the dangers of those journeys. Only one reaction to the story of Pasiphae and the bull. Holy cow. That's a great dad joke. Boom. All right, attendance. Yep, attendance is up now. Choose green. What happened to Ariadne after being left on the island? So this is great news, right? So she actually ends up with two gods fighting over her. So it's Glaucus, this kind of minor sea god, and Dionysus, the god of wine, fighting over her. Dionysus is actually able to trap Glaucus using his like vines growing everywhere. And so Ariadne marries Dionysus, and she like lives happily ever after. So like, take that, Theseus. Oh, Athens had the first Hunger Games. That's a good parallel, right? Sending these seven boys and girls into the labyrinth. Yep, that's a good parallel. Except I guess they weren't really attacking each other. They were just trying to stay alive, which didn't work out so well. Until you're Theseus. Are we still attending Friday's class, or is it asynchronous? Yeah, so I will mention that and then we will close. Friday, you are here. You're in like live. There will be attendance. The TAs are teaching. We're going to learn about Achilles. We're going to learn about Homer's Iliad. We'll learn a little bit about the research proposal moving forward. And then all of next week, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, next week will be all asynchronous, and I'll go ahead and put in the attendance for everybody. So you guys can watch the videos as it benefits you. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up with that. More like the Maze Runner. Yeah, that's a good parallel as well. Look, guys, have a great couple of days. You guys are working really hard. I really, really appreciate it. Keep it up. We will see you back here live at 11 a.m. on Friday, and have a great couple of days until then.